I'm Cadence Debuse, and this is Busybody Podcast. And today I'm joined by Sophie Strauss, who is a stylist for regular people. And I'm so excited to have her on. We met on the Instagram, as so many people do.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Can you tell us just quickly, give me your bio?
Yeah, I mean, you did say it, and I did trademark that, by the way.
Smart.
The patent and trademark office called me, and they congratulated me that I didn't make any stupid mistakes on my application, and so that's my little flex for the day. Yes, I'm a stylist for regular people. That basically just means I work with everybody and anybody, all ages, sizes, genders, body sizes, body shapes, body abilities. Anybody who's interested in working with me can work with me if they're nice to me. And I help people with all kinds of things from, I do a lot of closet clean outs. I work with people's sort of existing wardrobes to help them put better outfits together, take people shopping. I do virtual work with people from all over the world, weddings. I've even styled people for funerals.
Wow.
I've done it all.
That's so cool.
I'm really excited to do this.
Me too. Thanks so much for reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like probably like a lot of your maybe recent followers, I found you off of the viral.
Yeah.
Internet's crazy like that, but I'm so glad.
Yeah, it is super crazy, but it's awesome. It's connected me. Thank God that something went viral that is in alignment with my actual values. I was like, what if I just posted something that was like, I love making pizza, and then just God.
That's how I feel every time something I'll have something go viral and I'm like, I hope people are ready to hear about Palestine.
Exactly. Exactly. I definitely saw a few people with Bible quotes in their bios following me, and I was like, get ready for my pro-abortion post.
Yep. Buckle up. Well, I feel like I do think to some degree there's something kind of self-selecting about.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm excited. I've been listening to the podcast.
That's so good.
Yeah, enjoying. How long have you done a podcast for?
Off and on for a long time. I mean, the very first season is years ago now. I feel like it's 6 years ago or something. And then took a 2-year hiatus or something like that. And then I started it up again. And then, honestly, I think so many things when you're a, young business owner or solo business owner, I really was basically just shy to center myself.
That's how I feel about, I mean, some of it is also just, I think maybe being a control freak, but there's so many things about being a solo business owner where somebody will say to me, you should have an assistant. And I'm
right.
It gives me hives. I'm you're probably right. It'd be nice to have some boundaries and some balance in my life, but also nobody does my calendar like I do my calendar.
Exactly. Exactly. And I would love, I like having these conversations. So it's fun to have people on, and the more I've done it, the more there's a few people that I could see kind of coming, the run coach. I got a lot of good feedback on that. And then I was like, wait a minute, we do the run club all the time. You should just be on every 4 episodes.
Yeah.
That's just silly. What am I doing?
Yeah.
So, it keeps developing. Tell me about yourself, because I love what you do. How did that start? How did you start becoming a stylist for regular people?
Yeah. So I became a stylist for regular people pretty organically. I think ever since I was a little kid, I was obsessed with clothes, and I would do a lot of sketching and fashion design and stuff like that. But I think the actual idea of, being a designer felt, on one level, I think it felt like a level of education I was not interested in pursuing. If I'm being totally honest, it's an incredibly intensive skill that I was not that interested in learning. I'd like to learn more now as an adult, but as a kid, I was oh, I don't want to do that. And what I really liked was working with sort of existing stuff, and just was a big consumer of fashion. And growing up in LA, I think the idea, in the sort of the early era of the celebrity stylist, I was well, that seems so not appealing to me. It just seemed a little bit empty. I don't think I thought that critically about it at the time. I just was I don't know if that really speaks to me. And I was a musician. I became a musician I was like, went to school for music. I was a musician for a long time. I guess I still technically am. That made no money at all. And though I'm proud of a lot of the work that I did. And then I was like working like an assistant job in television. And on the side, in the meantime, like my love of clothes and shopping and fashion and all of these things that I think make other people stressed about getting dressed or getting new clothes, the endless options and the, figuring out what you have to wear and all those things was like so fun for me. And so when my friends at various sort of like transitional moments in their lives needed either to figure out new clothes or figure out something to wear for something, I was always the first person they called. It was like, hey, I got a new job. Can you take me shopping? Or, hey, like, I think I might be trans and I'm not really sure like what to wear, like what that might, like, I don't even know where to look. Can you take me shopping? Or can we even just like go through your closet? Can I borrow some pieces? Or, friends who maybe like had gained or lost weight. And it was really fun. And that was just something I was doing for friends. And then I started making them, like some friends, I'd make them like online shopping lists too. If it was like, okay, maybe they don't have time to go shopping. And then again, like in the middle, like just this as a hobby, a friend posted, like this is probably like 5 or 6 years ago now, that a friend of theirs was going through chemotherapy treatment and was like, had an event to go to for like her husband was nominated for like it wasn't a Grammy, but it was like a music award. He's a composer and was just like not feeling super great and needed to get clothes and also like wasn't from Los Angeles and just like, is there anybody who likes shopping who would want to take her shopping? And kind of like sight unseen, I like said, yeah, me, that sounds like something I would love to do. And I like picked this total stranger up and took her shopping for a day. And she was so wonderful. And I just did it for free. And I think that like something kind of sparked in me, like what is possible outside of how we think of like a celebrity stylist as like being somebody who's kind of almost like a translator or like a getting dressed doula or something, and that like clothes are really fraught for people, but they're also really important even for people who don't think they're really important. And so then I like had a newborn baby like a year and a half or so later, and a couple of years later maybe, and then my like TV job, I like got laid off and I was like, should I just like do this styling thing full time? And I kind of just like put the call out and people started saying yes. And here I am.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I love the getting dressed doula.
Yeah, that's that. I don't know. No offense to any real doulas. I know a few doulas. I'm not, trying to delegitimize your extremely hard work.
But I think that's so real though. I think fashion and makeup, I know you've done some stuff about makeup, basically expressing yourself and taking the time to figure out what your style is and express yourself is so layered for people. I have a friend that it occurred to me that she never wears makeup, and I don't wear like a lot of makeup, but I love makeup. I have so much makeup. And I've always worn makeup since I was in like 8th grade or something. And we were like talking about something. I think she was like quitting her job, and I was like, oh, like somehow we were talking about, and I was like, you should go and get like some glitter eyeliner or something. And she was like, yeah, totally. And then I was like, legitimately, like, I'll go with you. And then she like shut it down so hard. And I was like, oh, you're like really against adorning yourself. Like I suddenly like saw it in a whole new light. I was like, oh, that's true. I've never seen you wear makeup. Like never. Like, yeah, clearly you have very strong feelings about this.
No, I think, and like makeup, I have like a style Patreon, and I try to, this is like, I think not how most Patreons work. I'm just like I feel like maybe I'm like a little teacher's pet nerd who's like, I'm going to do lesson plans. Like each month has a theme. And so like January, I just felt like makeup had come up a lot, and I've been sort of just trying to unpack like what, a relationship with makeup that feels more rooted in expression and less rooted in like trying to just make sure that I'm pretty all the time. And, pretty in quotes, for whatever standard that means. And, but I think the thing that is different with makeup than something like clothes is like your friend, people really can opt out. And that's, I think, especially for women, almost always a conscious decision versus like, for people who are socialized as men, that feels like a passive decision, right? You have to actively opt in and women have to opt out. But the thing with clothes is like, unless you live in a nudist community, which like more power to you, like everybody, whether or not you like think about it a lot, we can't really opt out of it. And then the people who sort of make a stand of being like, oh, well, I don't care, that I've just found that that's very rarely true. And that it's either somebody with immense privilege who like is either like basically like a wealthy straight white guy who gets to sort of be like, I don't have to care. Like I get everything I need no matter what. Or it's somebody who feels so marginalized by what fashion has to offer them that it's like too painful to care. And so knowing and sort of acknowledging, okay, no, like we all have to do this every day. How do I help people do that in a way that like feels really good, or at least feels not bad? And ideally, it's not like terrible for the planet and for like workers and things like that. Because like, I think super similar, like one of the reasons I so connected to your work is like all the reasons that people usually, I think, are taught to engage with clothes and style are like really fucked up in the same way that I think a lot of the reasons people are like taught to engage with like body movement are pretty fucked up. Like, like both style and movement, I think, are really rooted in like fat phobia. Like you move to stay skinny, you get dressed to look skinny, and or to fit in, or to keep up with trends, or to project a certain thing, from the outside in. And so I think it's very interesting to sort of see like the different like fields of work that people can be in, where we're all kind of trying to do a similar thing, which is like, no, the actual practice is like pretty meaningful and cool. It's so tangled up in garbage. So like, how do we get it out of the garbage?
It makes me think there's a question that, especially when I had an in-person studio, because we would literally just be sitting there doing an intake face-to-face. And we would ask people, actually, I don't know why that makes any difference. I ask the same questions now, but people would be like, oh, I've been doing spin for 3 months. I've been doing bar for 3 months, like whatever the trend is. And I would always ask, is it doing what you want it to do? Is it working for you? And then they would look kind of confused and like almost like glaze over for a second. And they'd always be like, well, I'm really sweaty after. And I'm like, right. But like, do you feel stronger? Are you like anything that you hoped to get when you walked in the door 3 months ago of those classes? And I feel like it's almost the same question of like, when we get dressed and you are like, and you ask someone like, does this look good? It's like, what are you asking? What does that even mean?
I get this all the time. I mean, I feel like maybe, and then I'm sure when you ask people that 9 times out of 10, if they do have an answer, it's like, well, I lost 5 pounds. And it's like,
yeah, well, honestly, most of the time they're like, they realize they hadn't lost any weight. And then you're like, okay, let's do a program where you're actually like getting stronger and like, not more
functional. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, let's do
not just rooted in like, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it's so funny. I would say like half of my clients are people who like have followed my Instagram for a long time and kind of like are like on board with the ethos. And then half of them are people who like either got referred through somebody else, or like, I love when I get people always like refer me to their moms, which I love, but then they're like definitely not like up on the woke lingo, which I love. Actually, I appreciate it. It's very like real, but I'll get people who reach out and they're like, I just want somebody to tell me like, I just need to like put on my clothes and I just need you to tell me if it's working for me or not. And I'm like, cool, what does that mean? And they're like, like, am I pulling it off? And I'm like, okay, yes, sure. What does that mean? And they're like, like, does it look good on me? Like, is it flattering? Can I carry this off? And I'm like, let's go deep. What are you asking me? Because if what you're asking me is like, do your clothes make you look thin? Like, you got to hire somebody else. Cause like, I'm not interested in achieving that for you. And then if you're asking me to tell you whether or not like you're allowed to wear the clothes that you have, that's like a recipe for like total disconnection from your closet and never being able to walk out of the door with confidence unless somebody else points to you and goes, yep, that works for you. Like, what if you just work on building up like essentially the muscle of like, do I like this? Do I not like this?
That's like the original What Not to Wear, ladies. That's what that's all about. They tell you whether or not you can wear it or not.
That's literally exactly. I mean, I rewatched What Not to Wear like this year. So I was sort of just curious because I mean, I don't know, like we all grew up on it and kind of like 100%. Idolized it. And like I watched it and like I think I expected it to be like, oh, some of this doesn't hold up, like, but some of it's fun. And it's like truly, I think 98% of it is like actually like so
like harmful.
So harmful. Like just I mean, so brutal and cruel and racist and phobic and misogynistic and like classist. Just, I mean, and then they're like putting you in a pencil skirt and peep toe pumps and a blazer and a statement necklace. And you're like, okay. They're like, but it's leopard print, so it's funky like you. And you're like, oh my God. Like, and they just throw away people's whole closets.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's really what it did is because I actually get a lot of clients who reference What Not to Wear, who say to me, like, they use, like, I would watch What Not to Wear, and I think it was appealing to be handed $5,000 to shop. But the idea of getting rid of all my clothes, I was like, that's not worth it. Like, this is so, but something that so many people have said to me is like, they yearned for it to happen. They were like hoping that it was like a Jesus take the wheel. Like, they felt so lost that the idea that somebody would just come in and do it for you was like really appealing. And I think is like very reflective of a time where like, especially like the mid and early aughts, right? We're just like all about external criticism and like policing of like how people looked and acted and all of those things. And trying to like make sure you follow those rules.
Yeah. And that makes me think too of another overlap we have where there sometimes more so when I was younger, people would reach out and say, well, I want to work with you, but I hate exercise. So you have to yell at me. I need you to push me the whole time. And I'm just like, I don't want to work with you then, because like, that's not what I'm here to do. And that's totally this idea of like, can I just kind of give my body to you? Can you just do all of it? Motivate me, push me, make my limbs do the movements basically. And then I'm like, well, then what are we doing? Like you're not learning anything. You're not engaging with your body. You're gonna I have all the power. What if I go away? Then what will you do? You know?
It's a very like teach a man to fish, give a man a fish kind of. Yeah. And I was listening to a couple of your podcast episodes over the last like week or so. And as I recently turned 30, and like within a month of turning 30, I threw my neck out in my sleep and it was like, oh, I guess this is my life now. And I think I was so totally incapacitated for like 24 hours. And I was like very grateful that I happened to have a work day that was like totally remote. And I was like immediately aware, largely honestly, because earlier in the week I had gone to a very beloved like chiropractor nearby who is great about like SI recurring hip issues that I have, I think because of SI issues I had when I was pregnant, that then it's like translate, right. And as you know, it was like, okay, well, I was like, but I also have this like shoulder thing. He's like, well, yeah, that's because you've got, that's doing this and this, like that it's all one it's like, how am I holding my son? How am I sitting at my desk all day? Like these things are, what muscles am I strengthening versus like how much am I hunched over like a, with my Scrivener's hump and, whatever, right? Like, and it was like, I think for the first time it did really click. It's funny, during pregnancy, this was very obvious to me, like the functional root of strengthening my body, and like that there could be all these other reasons besides just trying to like maintain a thin body.
Yeah.
That I might like engage in strengthening my body or flexibility or like whatever these things are. And that, but then like when after I gave birth, it was sort of like, oh, that's out the way. Like, I'm not even thinking about that anymore. And then now it's like from, I like left side carry, and that's like absolutely like messed up my hips, like all these things. I'm like, oh no, actually, what if I like, I was like, and I said, oh, I'm doing Pilates. Like I do Pilates twice a week. And he's like, yeah, well, Pilates class is great, but like, they're not looking at your specific needs and going like, okay, well, Sophie's got her hips out of line. So the whole class is going to do this thing today. So like, I think realizing like, oh, there are all of these other reasons I might engage in this practice. I think that feels really similar to like what I try to remind people about with style, is like, there are all of these other reasons besides just sort of like signaling some level of like class or signaling your body normativity outside of you, right? That like, it can make you feel like the best version, the best version of style is quick communication, and is an option, is an opportunity that we all have to say a quick something about ourselves as we move through the day. And that's also why it feels so bad when you don't feel any agency over how you're dressed, because it feels like opening your mouth and the wrong words come out, and so, and it doesn't mean that every time you leave your house, you have to be like dressed to the nines. I don't believe that at all. But I think when it's just about like, did your clothes, right? Did getting dressed and what you're wearing, is that something you got to choose, or did it feel like something that kind of happened to you?
Do you have questions that you ask people? It's making me think of like, especially for my Nourish program, I have a whole questionnaire, and I try to ask them really kind of both sides of the spectrum in terms of like their relationship with food. So I ask if they have like favorite recipes from childhood, and also what kind of like garbage they got around food from their parents. And, so we can have like, what's a positive, what's a negative from your own personal history. And I feel like at various times I've kind of asked myself questions about my own style, but certainly not with any organization, really just by anything from like watching Queer Eye to seeing people, particularly like queer women, who the way they dress, I'm like, oh, they are really not dressing for male gaze. And where am I dressing for male gaze? Am I always dressing for male gaze? Like how, like, what does that look like if I pull that apart? I'm curious if you like, is there a way that you help people kind of interrogate what their style is?
Totally. And it's really tricky because I'm also like, anti is maybe a strong word, but I'm like a little anti categorization. In the same way where like, I think if anybody's like, I only do Pilates, you'd be like, you could like, life is long. You could do like whatever. I think, and I think so much style advice out there is like all about sort of like rigid, like pick your 3 words and stick to them or whatever. And so I'm always like
a Pinterest board kind of a thing.
Totally. But at the same time, obviously it's really useful to be able to like start shaping up the sort of perimeters of like a little bit of an identity. So I think the first thing because I usually am starting, I'm not like starting at somebody's closet with 0, right? Everybody already has clothes. So often I'll sort of ask them what they're struggling with when they get dressed, which is like a broad sort of starting point, right? Is there, like and I'll ask, for example, what's the event or like daily sort of excursion where if I said to you right now, you have to get dressed to go to a nice dinner in 5 minutes, would you break into a flop sweat, or would you be like, no, that's fine, I got that? Like what's the life moment where if you had to get dressed for that super quickly, you would be like, nope, it's not doable.
Oh, I love that.
The big one I ask is, what's something you love but never wear? Or something that you always put on and it doesn't feel obviously terrible, but it just doesn't feel right and you don't know why. I'm really interested in those gray areas because there really are tangible traits to our clothes. And it's helpful for me to kind of go, oh, okay, well, you seem to gravitate more towards, right? Like this has the proportions of this and the material of that and this color, this fabric. I also ask people what they want to say about themselves with their clothes, and that they should try not to use words that are like rooted in fashion, that like, that's my job. So like, and that it's actually, I think people also feel a lot of pressure with their clothes to be cohesive. I think social media especially makes us feel like we're supposed to be like a consistent brand all the time.
Yeah.
Which is not what human beings are. And so I get people who are kind of like, okay, well, this is a little all over the place, and then it's like, no, it's okay. Like I can dress super femme one day and super sexy and super, sometimes I want to wear like a business suit. And sometimes I'm like, right now I'm in like tie-dye sweatpants and a tie-dye vintage t-shirt, and I'll wear Birkenstocks and I'll feel great. And then like I could wear a ball gown the next day and I would also feel great. Like all of these things, we contain multitudes,
I think also, I mean, do you find this? I feel like my self-consciousness around my closet is often that I have a lot of clothes because I do contain multitudes. And then I feel this pressure, like that's a lot. Like I shouldn't have this sweater from 20 years ago. I shouldn't have, or that idea, like if you haven't worn it in 2 years, you have to throw it away. And then I was like literally going through old clothes. And then what happens is I like shop for my own, I'm like, oh, I could get rid of this. And then I'm like, oh wait, I kind of like this sweatshirt. I haven't worn this in a while. And then I'm like, oh, this is terrible. I'm keeping all these things. But then I find like there was a time where I like cleaned out a bunch of my stuff. And then I was like trying to paint a room and I didn't have any more painting clothes. And I was like, you idiot. Like you got rid of all your grubby clothes.
It's so funny you bring that up because I really think that like the minimalism as like the ultimate marker of like moral achievement has like been presented to us in like the worst way. And it's like obviously better to start with and then like maintain having less stuff, but it's not actually better for the environment to throw away all of your perfectly good stuff. And that's something that I think people have like totally lost sight of. And I do a lot of like, one of the services I offer is I clean out people's closets with them. And my goal is always to make people like, if I do a closet clean out the way that I like to do it, you should come away from it feeling like you just went shopping and not feeling like you just, and it's not like we don't get rid of stuff, but my goal is I hope that you get rid of like half the amount of stuff that you think you're going to get rid of, and like enough, especially like I know you live in New York. I used to live in New York. Like sometimes people don't have a lot of space. And so you really do have to get rid of stuff. And like, I want to be respectful of that. But at the same time, this idea that you need to clean it out so you can like make room for new stuff, the new you, is like, it's just so antithetical to having any respect for these pieces. And, I think like, you have something that you had from 20 years ago, that's amazing. Like that's beautiful. And it's rare too. Like the more I work with people of sort of like a different age ranges, like millennials and older will have that kind of stuff. And obviously like younger than millennial, a lot of people just like aren't that old, so they can't have, but it's not just that they don't have older stuff. It's that it's all fast fashion. And so it's all synthetics and it's all pretty like shitty quality. And you're sort of like, versus the sort of like, I've worked with a lot of clients like in their 60s and 70s where it's like, even if, they've had stuff 40, 50 years, but A, that stuff lasts, like the quality is just better. And B, it has right? It has like you've held on to it because you like it. Like, why would you get, if you like it and it's old, then who cares? If you're getting rid of it because it's like off trend or like because you're supposed to, then and there's also this real like binge purge closet cycle I notice a lot, which is people will be like, oh my God, I have way too much stuff. I got to clean out my closet. So they, without any assessment of what they actually, their own preferences, they're just kind of looking at this. I haven't worn that in a while. Haven't worn that in a while. Haven't worn that in a while. Out. And no assessment really of like why they're keeping the pieces they're keeping, whether, you know, okay, let's say you got rid of a shirt, right? Did you get rid of it because it was striped and you don't like stripes? Or did you get rid of it because it's cropped and you don't like crop shirts? You didn't assess it. So you don't know. So then you're going to go back and you're going to buy another shirt. Maybe you buy a long striped shirt and it turns out actually it's stripes you don't like, right? Like you don't. And so then you got rid of a bunch of stuff with no real assessment. You then have an empty closet and you, like you mentioned, right? You go to it and some need comes up and you go, oh my God, I got rid of all of my clothes that I can wear for XYZ occasion. So then you have to panic buy that stuff because you're like, well, now I got to get something to paint in. And so I go and you buy something cheap, right? And then your cloth, right? And inevitably, oh, I have a wedding. I got rid of all my fancy stuff and I don't even have time to think about what I like. I just have to get a dress so that I can wear it to this wedding. And then you have a dress you don't like, and rinse and repeat like over and over again.
You're making me feel good about my fancy dresses that are just still there that are so old because I don't do that many fancy things, but I don't get rid of them because I'm like, well, if I need to go to a fancy thing, I already like that dress.
That's right. That's brilliant. I love that. I want to see them.
We could do a closet reveal.
Yeah, we'll do a closet reveal. But yeah, I also think like I was curious something, you know, I like mentioned this to you when we were messaging, but like I also wonder, and I don't know what your like personal history with your own relationship to your body is like, but working in a field where you are holding a lot of other people's body relationships all the time and sort of how you manage that, because it's something I think I'm still navigating and like feel I'm like proud of myself for how I'm handling it, but it's also like, it can be a lot sometimes.
Yeah, that's such an interesting topic. And I'm glad that you sent it to me before, because I've been like mulling it. You know, I always wonder what people's perceptions of me are to some extent, right? Because we're always, anything is curated. As soon as you put it out there, it's curated. Totally. Sometimes, you know, it does kind of crack me up when someone says that something that you put out into the world is really vulnerable. And I'm like, it's not vulnerable. I decided to put it out there. It's not candid. Like, I mean, it's vulnerable in that I care about it.
This is my third take.
Right. You're right. And it's just like anything, like, first of all, I just think like creating anything is vulnerable. Literally putting my classes out is super vulnerable. I always tell people it feels like I am planning a dinner party and I really hope everybody shows up. And that's like the most stressful feeling, right? When you're like, I invited these 8 people and I hope they show up. And if one of them cancels, like, oh my God, we're going to have to reorganize this and that. And like,
oh my God,
you know, all that
I
stuff.
Literally can't tell you, like my husband deals with nobody's coming to my party anxiety that I get every time I host like a clothing swap. It's honestly, I don't do classes anymore because of that anxiety. It was like, I do like recorded or like PDF handbooks. Cause I'm like, you know, I do these style field trips. I'm like, nobody's coming. Nobody wants to come to my party. It's the worst feeling.
Exactly.
So that is vulnerable.
That's major vulnerable. But I think like, I hope that I think it's pretty clear. I put out a pretty like regular side of myself. So of course I have my own body stuff that comes up. I think what's been really interesting for me is like the more that I keep writing about it and working on it and talking to people about it and like doing the Nourish program that I'm doing now. It's like the more I say it, the more I believe it myself. Like I already believed it, but like I start to really like, I don't know. Like I remember I got off some, either I like posted something or I was like got off a Zoom call and I turned to my boyfriend and I was like, you know, keep going around about how it doesn't matter if you're fat or not. You know what? I really believe it. It doesn't matter. Like, I was just like, I was like, fuck you, everyone who thinks being fat sucks. Like,
yeah.
And I say this as like not someone who's walking around in like a a large body, but to the, you know, but we all have that is like, that's what interests me about the fashion crossover. Basically, there's a constant fear of being fat that we just get fed like forever. Yeah. And I was just talking to a client about this yesterday about eating patterns, and she's in the Nourish group. And I was just like, I hear you saying basically every time you have something that's pleasurable, you call it indulging. And yeah. I'm looking at what you're eating and I'm not seeing anything crazy. Like I'm not seeing you really being quote unquote out of control. It just looks like sometimes you have a fun meal that you went out for, or you ordered in, or you made yourself like, and I was like, let's really sit for a second with like, why do we call pleasure wrong? Like already you've just labeled it somehow wrong. And I said, I think we have this constant fear of quote unquote fat, which to me is really just, what does that mean? It means you're on the outside, you're excluded. There's something wrong with you. You're like, you don't fit here. Here's the cool kids and you have to sit at the not cool kid table. It actually has nothing to do with like what you look like or your body or anything. It's literally just a term for like, you're going to be excluded. Yeah. You're going to not fit. And everyone is afraid of that because we're humans and we want to be in community. And so that's what it feels like, this terror. Don't push me out. Don't put me on the outside. And I was like, so let's just like be adults and recognize that that is really what we're saying when we're like, I feel fat. I'm scared of being fat. Did this make me fat? Do I look fat? We're literally just being like, please tell me that I still belong. Please tell me I'm still in the club with, you know, like, don't leave me alone. And that's so painful and sad. And I think like that is something that I really notice in myself when I have those feelings, because I've talked about this in my classes too. It's like, I'm not a magician or something. I also have those feelings, right? But I have worked on this enough to know that that's just like a voice. And I can say to myself, why am I having that feeling? Am I tired? Am I like run down? Have I not been doing enough things that make me happy and feel good? Where is that coming from? And like, is this just an anxiety that I'm now like putting into this? Do I literally feel like I'm like disconnected from my friends right now? Do I feel shunned in some way? Do I need to like call someone and just be like, let's hang out? I'm feeling weird. Yeah. So I feel like I continue to grow by working with people. It's part of why I like having a business and having like a client facing business, as opposed to just like download this thing and I don't ever talk to you. But it is also quite heavy for sure, because I think something that will like never cease to amaze me is how much pain people will walk around with for years and years and decades and decades. And that is very painful for me. And I think just like naturally somehow, like even as a child, I just was always striving to feel better and heal from things, and just had a real sense that like that other people seem to be happier in some way and I want to feel that. And so I just was like reading, listening, taking the class, going and doing all the things. And obviously I had a lot of agency to do that. But when I hear someone has just been like struggling for like 15 years with knee pain or something, or like worse, just some horrible idea about their body, and that breaks my heart. And that's so heavy. And I do literally do things to just like journal it out, or like, you know, kind of give that back to the universe, because just recognize everybody has their own path. And like, when I hear those stories and it breaks my heart, I've like literally cried about clients just feeling so sad for somebody, or hearing them tell me a story. And then I'm just like carrying this around. How could someone talk to this person this way? Like blah, 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 that kind of stuff. And I'm sure you must get horrible stories from people about being bullied or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think what you were saying earlier about, okay, what is somebody saying, whether or not they actually are fat, when they ask about, oh, am I, you know, afraid of being, do I look fat? Did I get fat? XYZ, that they're really talking about a fear of being ostracized or alienated or left to sort of like languish outside of and like on the fringe of like what is considered like a human being with value. And I think that in what I do, I have to help people often navigate the unfair systemic reality of that, right? That in society as it stands, there is truth to that.
100%.
That even just as far as getting dressed, and like this, you know, something as a thin person too, which is like a place I'm kind of constantly trying to make sure like I'm being respectful in. But that like, it is actually true that like a lot of my clients especially are people who have like gone through eating disorder recovery, which has left them on the like led them beautifully and like wonderfully and in a much healthier, happier place to a size that is not in stores or not easily in stores. And so what does that mean, especially coming out of the pandemic where the way that stores are stocked has changed anyway. People's bodies changed, and they didn't in a sort of way where they were totally isolated from having to even like put on clothes or anything like that. It's like a really harsh sort of like reemergence, and sort of being like, okay, how do I provide somebody with the support and sort of like guidance and care to give them as close to an experience, like a humanizing experience as possible, no matter what their size is, in a world and in a system that is like actively working against that. That's saying, yeah, like we're not going to carry over size 14 in stores, right? There's like 3 or 4 places you can probably go at all that are going to carry your sizes. And then the rest of it is going to have to be online. And thinking, I think a lot of the time that my role, because there are incredible like fat models and stylists and style influencers who talk about this all the time, but that it's something where like, you know, straight sized or thin people don't really listen or pay attention. So it's something where I feel like I don't want anybody to feel like there's some type of human who doesn't get to access style, and doesn't get to access like what I'm trying to talk about or like connect them with. But it's really complicated. And, you know, I think in many ways, the people I much more frequently have heavy conversations with people who are in like pretty normative and thin bodies, because their world hasn't challenged how they think about themselves as much. And so the things they say about themselves or the things they ask me to approve of them, right? Okay, just like kind of almost, you know, like with a little like whisper, like, okay, but does this make me look like so skinny or whatever?
Right.
And I think in many ways that's the most challenging for me, because it really like that does needle at my own like body insecurities, and being like, I really try not to use that language, not just for other people, but like for myself, because I can feel how bad it can get for me to have that like in my vocabulary at all. And so, but not trying to be like some riddle and be like, well, you know, or like Socrates, like just being the most obnoxious, like, well, how do I meet that client where they're at and not avoid the question, but not necessarily reinforce the idea? Because I'm also not trying to like hammer body positivity or body neutrality into people when they're not really like open to it. But it doesn't mean I'm going to reinforce it. So like sort of being like, does this make me look skinny? And be like, how do you feel in it? Right? Like sort of like throwing a question back at them. And it can be a little annoying sometimes, but I think that feels to me like maybe even like a boundary for myself, just being like, I can't really engage with you on this just for my own sanity, you know? I should probably journal.
Well, now I have a question for you. This made me think, and this is something because this is something I think about for myself when I get dressed. And it also ties into when I have negative thoughts, or when I'm just kind of like basically just dealing with having a body in the world and trying to dress for the outside world. What is the difference basically between something being flattering versus something conforming with sort of heteronormative, like patriarchal standards? Because this is a question I ask myself a lot. When I try something on that like I ordered or something. And then I'm like, oh, I don't like how this looks on me. Oftentimes what I'm seeing is like, oh, it's cutting into my hip in a way that makes my leg bulge or something. And I'm like, that, I don't like that. But then I'm like, do I not like that because it's like drawing attention to my like smushy thigh? Or is it literally just not flattering because that's just not flattering on anyone unless they are like, it's almost
like an art piece or something.
Yeah. Or like, yeah, I'm almost like someone who's like into clothes that almost look like bondage or something. Like it's almost like a fetish of some kind, you know? And I'm like literally I'm thinking of like, I ordered this high leg bathing suit and I just like didn't like the way that it cut me. Fortunately, my boyfriend pointed out that it was like the crotch was really square. And he was like, you have another one where it's like tapers and then it looks fun. He was like, try that one on. I was like, oh my God, you're so right. You're such a weird fashionista. Like, but I was like, it just looked awkward in some way. But oftentimes, like, I'll look at accounts where they are doing fashion on like all different kinds of bodies. And I'm always just like questioning my response to like different types of dressing. And it's the same thing when I like look at, you know, certain like queer women that I'm just like, like what, like, I'm trying to get like the key to like, how are you dressing in this way where I like really feel your expression? And I'm like, how can I bring some of that into myself? And also, what are the things that I get excited about? And what do I immediately kind of push away in this really knee-jerk way? And I'm always question that, like, what is making me just go, ooh, that's not allowed, you know?
Yeah. So that's a very tricky question, and I'm glad you asked it. I personally sort of see those two terms as the same thing, like flattering and like that sort of heteronormative, whatever sort of beauty standard. I tend to just like, that is sort of how I would define flattering. And so I sort of have like, try not to like have flattering be like a goal. But at the same time,
mind exploding.
but at the same time, I would be totally lying if I said, I'm not often thinking about how my body looks in my clothes. So, you know, it's a work in progress for me, for myself, for sure. But I think something I try to do a lot is talk about the proportions of clothes instead of like flattering. And because then you can talk about proportions in a pretty like neutral way, which is like when your skirt is bigger, your waist is smaller. When you're, and then like there are some looks that really are not about having a small waist. Like beautiful looks we have celebrated, you know, lots of the Simone Rocha that just came down the runway and, you know, early Balenciaga and like, you know, 60s shapes and the flappers from the 20s, right? Like the idea that everything had to have the most snatched waist in the world is actually not something that's always been in fashion. And so, so presenting that as a neutral, right? Here are your options. It's just like, and you don't, it's a short-term commitment. So like maybe you wear something and you see how it goes. And like, this is something I do for myself because I'm definitely like, my knee-jerk reaction is like, God, where's, especially like I have big boobs. So like, if I don't actively define my waist, then my clothes get defined by the line of my bust, which is wider than the rest of my body. And that is something that like, you know, ingrained fat phobia makes me go, well, that can't have that, right? Can't have people think that my body is bigger than it is. And it's like, first of all, they probably aren't thinking about my body at all because they're thinking about their body and their schedule and their kids and their dog and their whatever.
Right.
But the other thing I do with clients all the time is like, when there's something like that, whether it's like a specific piece, right? Like maybe it was the bathing suit that you got. And I think there's a difference, which is like, and this is like what I'm talking about, which is like, can you separate? Do you not like it? Cause you like, it's uncomfortable, it's itchy, you don't like the color, you don't like the style, like for sort of reasons that are rooted in preferences? Or are you like afraid of it assigning you something? Or maybe it's both, right? Like you might be afraid of like the social consequences of being seen in the way that it makes you look. But if it's just this and you actually like, there are things that are both, right? There are things that are like beautiful that are not flattering. Mm-hmm. Does it make your heart go like pitter patter when you put it on? Because then if it does, then fuck flattering. Mm-hmm. But if you also are like, I also just, it's not like, there's nothing else, right? This bathing suit is not singing to me otherwise. And I don't really like how it feels on my body and the shape it's giving me. It's not for you. Like, you don't have to, you don't owe it to anybody to like wear something that makes you uncomfortable. But if you do find, I think a lot of us do have things where you're like, if somebody else wore that and looked at the exact same way I look at it, I'd think it was cool.
Right.
Like my challenge is always like, you know, okay, I'm going to wear like an oversized thing and I'm not going to define my waist. And if I feel a little like, whoa, this is weird, I'm used to making sure that my body is like shown off in my outfits. Like, you wear it to something low stakes. Like, you go walk the dog, you go to the grocery store and you come back and you like take a breath and you're like, well, the world didn't end and I didn't die. I'm okay. And like, you edge up from there. It's like, okay, then maybe you wear it like to a safe place, like to dinner with a girlfriend, right?
Right.
And like, maybe if you're really stepping out of your comfort zone, you literally say like, hey, I'm really trying to like push myself out of my comfort zone with my style lately. And so I'm like wearing something that is like unusual for me. And like, I really could just like use some, like when I show up for dinner, like, can you just gas me up on this a little bit? Like, I need to feel so good. Like, you know, like that, it sounds sort of silly, but it's like really powerful to like just start doing that and be like, oh, it's like practice.
That makes me kind of think about back to my makeup question or makeup kind of comment, because we do seem to be in a new age, thanks to the youngsters, of makeup not necessarily being flattering, but being much more on the expression scale, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an interesting question to bring to clothing. You're giving me so many things to think about. And and I think like similar, well, the to your original point too, you can always opt out of makeup. That's not, you don't need that to leave the house to walk the dog.
Right.
You need to get dressed. And what I'm also thinking about, which is also kind of interesting because it relates to bodies, just having a body too, is like, I feel like there's a lot of things in my closet I don't wear because I don't have a context for them. And I feel like there are also a lot of ways that we have bodies in the world that don't get expressed because of the environment that we live in. Our sexuality, being female and feeling safe to express your sexuality, or even, I certainly don't often dress super femme because I live in a big city, and the more femme you dress, the more catcalls you get. Totally. And that's like I remember last summer or the summer before, I was in Paris and I kept saying to my boyfriend, I was like, all the women are wearing these like flouncy, flowery dresses. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, look at all these like sundresses. And he was like, you can wear a sundress. And I was like, I'm not going to wear a sundress walking around New York City. I was like, this is amazing. These are like city women wearing these like fluttery, flimsy little dresses. I know they have issues there with catcalling, but nowhere near what we have.
I mean, as a girl who wore a lot of sundresses when I lived in New York City, you do get a lot of catcalls. You also get some like really creative stuff too. I wasn't ever a fan of it. It makes you feel totally unsafe. I have like a whole Instagram video because I also like grew up in Los Angeles, went to school in New York, came back here. So like have lived in cities my whole life where you're just like moving through super populated spaces. And I feel like a real go-to is like in LA, you need like a long light layer so that it's like you can go from like my skimpy sexy outfit for like date night or whatever to like, please do not perceive me. And then you can take it off and be like, all right, now I'm ready to be sexy when I get there. But on the way there, please do not ever, I'm invisible. You cannot look at me. Please don't look at me. And then, okay, now I'm here. Just like, that's a very, you know, female reality. I think, listen, there's like do I feel, quite frankly, you're raising a point about like physical comfort, and quite literal safety that comes up all the time when it comes to clothing, right? Like this is something that we know. We know that the way that like Black men especially, but Black men and women and trans people dress has a very direct impact on how they're going to be received in the workplace, how they're going, whether or not they're going to be literally policed on the street, right? We also know that like for trans people, there's a ton of pressure either to completely quote unquote pass or to, hide your trans identity entirely in public spaces in order to like access safety. Right. Being like a femme person walking around in a public space in a way that's like any amount revealing can feel really vulnerable and can feel like it jeopardizes your safety. These are negotiations that we make all the time. I mean, even quite recently, there was a piece that I read from a bunch of young Palestinian fashion designers, and a lot of them are very sort of thoughtful and do work really rooted in how Palestinians, especially in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, might need to dress either to camouflage with the environment, to be perceived less as a threat by, the Israeli military, that we can't separate those things. Yeah. At the same time, going to your earlier thing about feeling like you don't have a context for your clothes, I actually feel like your episode with Robbie from, I don't know, last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever, where he was talking about like learning basketball, like just like learning to shoot a hoop and being like, I'm not gonna be on the NBA. Like this still can have value to me. I think that there's like an analogy to be made with how we experience our clothes, which is that we have a tendency to silo them. And I would imagine that somebody like you who actually has like a pretty strict, right? Like you have to be in clothes that make sense for your job, obviously, on a regular basis. But then outside of that, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? And that oftentimes most people really don't like their like work clothes. They're like, yeah, I have my work clothes over there. And then I have my like life clothes, which then I think everybody has had that experience where you like, somebody's like, let's get a drink after work. And you're like, oh no, I'd rather die than like go get a drink in this outfit. Like I'm in my khakis and my dorky, like whatever, right? Like people have those feelings. And I think it's like, you don't have to go to a ball to wear a fancy dress, like, and you can pair a fancy dress with sneakers and you can throw a denim jacket over it. And then it's a little bit less fancy, right? You have all these sort of knobs in any outfit, every single piece, to dial it more casual, more fancy, more femme, more masculine, more revealing, more covered up. And you can sort of pull pieces from across your closet to get you to a balance that feels appropriate for the context. And then sometimes you just have to go like, fuck it, I got to wear something a little flashy to the supermarket. Like, life is short.
Yeah. And that I feel like that's this funny place. It kind of brings me back to that client who was like, anything that's pleasurable equals indulgent. I feel like it's just some kind of like Puritan. It's sort of like what you were saying about the closet, this idea of like the purity of minimalism. We just have all this moral judgment on kind of anything that feels excessive or really on that scale immediately is expressive, and I feel like so many people dress in a way that's very functional for their everyday, and they just are kind of like, this color looks good on me, and then they're out in the world and they don't ever get the opportunity to really dress up or they don't give themselves that opportunity. And similarly, I hear people hold themselves back physically with just the idea of like, oh, I tried doing that. I tried running or I tried biking like so long ago and I didn't like it. And I'm often just like, okay, but we've been working together for like 3 years and your body's so different than it was then. I really think that you might really like it. Like you have so much more confidence, you don't have pain anymore, blah, blah, blah. And, I don't know what that is besides it feels like capitalism. It's just some idea of like, let's all keep our heads down and just keep, towing the line. But, I do think about that certainly for my own closet and expressing myself, that especially because I work from home now, and with the pandemic and everything, like there's so many things that I don't have an opportunity to wear because I literally just like don't leave the house as much. So when I do, I really am like trying all things. And I think about like jewelry, like pearls that I have, that like a set of pearls I have that I never wear because those are fancy. And then I'm like, I should just be wearing these. Like, what am I waiting for first communion? Like, what when am I supposed to wear these? Because I love vintage clothes, and I'll have things that I like am not wearing, and I'm like, this thing is already literally 40 years old. Like, it's not getting younger in my closet. It's literally going to fall apart more. I need to wear it.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Like,
totally.
What, I'm just like, I don't want to stain it. And I'm like, it's literally going to just disintegrate before I've had a chance to enjoy it.
Totally. I mean, it's, going back earlier to what you were saying about like the puritanical sort of like no excess, no joy. I also think like quite specifically with when it comes to clothes, all of the like groups of people that we associate with any kind of like excessive or indulgent forms of dress are people that we usually sort of dismiss as like frivolous. Mm-hmm. Teenage girls get really associated with fashion and clothes, and those are the dumb little girls who care about clothes. Or
sure.
Women, queer people of color, especially like sort of like culturally relevant clothing that is often seen as like such an outlier, something that would stand out so much in our sort of like Western culture. And I think that's something that people forget about, right? So clothes are frivolous. Fashion is empty and superficial. And I think that people forget, and this is something I think about a lot, specifically when it comes to teenagers, and like an area where I think most of us can probably recall some experimentation with how we dressed, is that it is one of the very few avenues, especially for somebody who is otherwise like not fully in control of their lives, to express agency. Mm-hmm. And safely often. And so, but then yes, also like wear your damn, wear them.
Yeah.
That's what they're for.
Yeah. And I think like it ties all back into like, if so much of a fear, so kind of speaking to your point of working with people who are on the outside because they are perceived to be in fat bodies, or maybe they're trans and they're more visible in that way. And, so while I have clients that fit that description, I would say a lot of times I'm speaking to women also, to what you said, who don't fit those descriptions, but actually are in some ways in more pain because they haven't been challenged to really like interrogate why they have these opinions about themselves or why they box themselves in. If you're already on the outside, hopefully you have the support to like do the work to actually like come to a place of self-acceptance and like freedom in some way. Like, it can actually be quite freeing to be on the outside of what's perceived as normal and correct and all these things, because then you can really do whatever you want to some extent. And when you're on the inside, you are always being assumed in a way that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. All these things are in quotations. Yeah. And it just makes me think about like, if we have this fear always, like whether it's this quote unquote fear of being fat, or a fear of, like you said, being perceived like being labeled as something that we're like, what is the way that I'm dressing labeling me as? Is it saying something that I don't want to be saying? Are people going to perceive me in a way that I don't want them to perceive me? And it makes me think that there are a few people that I know who are very much into their clothing. I used to have a client who is just kind of, she collected like 1920s stuff and has these like really big eyes and kind of like just very, dramatic all the time and she also easily, you would call her like a character. And she clearly has the comfort and the confidence that she doesn't care if someone decides that she's frivolous by just looking at her. She has a full life. She's like an activist. She's a writer. She's like doing all these other things. But sure, someone could stand behind her at the bodega and just be like, who's this lady who's like basically wearing a costume,
Right.
And I feel like that is the place to like reconcile in yourself that, I've definitely like put an outfit together and been like, is this too much for what we're doing right now? And just been like, I mean, we're just like running into the city to do an errand, like maybe tone it down. And then it's like, why am I toning that down? Like, and for sure, we all have to code switch. Sometimes you don't want to like walk in to like open your bank account with like some insane outfit with like a train just because it might just make more difficulty for you than
Sure, totally.
but you're definitely making me just think how many places we hem ourselves in, no pun intended, because of just a fear of being perceived as too much. Like that's just always where it comes back to. I don't want to be seen as indulgent. Why? I don't want to be seen as excessive. Why? I don't want to be seen as like my body is too big. My personality is too big. All these things. It's like, we just want to all sit at the table with the people that we think we're supposed to be sitting with for some reason. I mean, it's not for some reason, it's capitalism and racism, but
I mean, I think that so many of my clients and my self-selecting filter on this is that nobody comes to me who's not interested in making some sort of shift. So yeah. I'm not trying to your point earlier, I'm not trying to convince somebody that they should work with me or anything like that. So they're interested in shifting something because they don't feel good. But I think a lot of people have no idea what it even looks like or feels like to feel like the parts of themselves that they love are being communicated through what they wear, because they have been so invested in being invisible or fitting in or making themselves look smaller, like literally and figuratively. And like nobody actually wants to feel that way. And like, it's not sustainable for anybody. And it comes up in all of these different ways. And but then it's really scary. Like I see this sort of swing in people, which is like the attempt to be invisible is either working too well or not working. And they want to be seen, but being seen feels scary.
100%.
And you can't do both. And so that's something I try to be like empathetic towards, because the world hasn't made it feel very safe to just sort of be yourself. And in many ways, the world has quite literally made it not safe to be yourself. And so I just try to like be gentle with people about that, but also, at the end of the day, nobody's really like if you really think about it, like how often have you walked down the street and thought to yourself, I don't like what she's wearing? Probably fucking like never.
Yeah.
Maybe like
it's
twice.
It's really just that you're like, oh my God, I would never wear a print like that. But you're not like, they look terrible. You're just like, oh my God, look at that crazy print. I would never wear that, but you probably do. Like one of my favorite things to do is wear like my kookiest garments with clients. And and people are like, yeah, but you're pulling it off. I'm like, there's nothing intrinsic to me that makes me pull this off, except that I look like somebody who's having a great time in it. Right.
And like, I swear to God, I get so many, like the crazier shit I wear, the more compliments I get. Sure. And it's like from the people you don't expect, like some old lady comes up to me and it's, I love that dress, right? Like whatever. And I kind of love when clients see that, because it's not like, oh, well, I'm wearing the most flattering couture. I'm wearing some kooky vintage, whatever. Right. And that
you're
risk
making
is
space for them. You're just making space.
Like to go like, look, like this is fine. And the other thing, what you said about what you've thought, oh, I wouldn't wear that, that's like a language shift that I try to like share with clients as well, is like when you put on that bathing suit, instead of saying to yourself, this bathing suit looks bad on me, or, it's not flattering, or it makes me look XYZ, right? I don't like this bathing suit. Just that simple. I don't like it.
Mm.
It's not for me. Right? The failure is no longer on your body.
Mm.
It's the clothes are not doing the thing you want. That's fine. Thank you. Might do it. And it's personal. It owns the subjectivity of it. You don't like it. It's irrefutable. It doesn't matter if your friend or your boyfriend goes, but you look great in it, babe. Who cares? You don't like it. That's all that matters. I don't like this shirt. And it changes. It's like, it's a small thing, but it really does build up in your head over time. You stop blaming yourself. You're not right. Like your clothes are there to serve you. It's not the other. You're not supposed to serve the clothes. So,
right.
You know, you have not, it is never your body that has failed an outfit. It is always the clothes that are not serving what you hopefully are intentionally trying to achieve by putting them together. And it's a simple matter of preference. I don't like this dress.
That's so brilliant. There are so many things to say. I want to kind of tie this all together. And I feel like I'm going to lose my train of thought. One thing I want to say that's just a short thing is like a magical moment in my life was an ex of mine was very much into clothing. And, you know, he loved like raw denim, and it was like his part-time job to like break in his jeans and things like that. And when we first met, I was still just a youthful 20-year-old, and always my jeans would gap in the back because I have a small waist and a big butt, and jeans have changed somewhat since then, but that was lifelong, always my whole life. And he was like, you know, you can just get them tailored. And I was like, what? And he was like, you can just get the waist taken in. It costs like $20, which is annoying if you already spent money on your jeans, but changed my life. Like that idea that like the clothes are wrong, instead of me just being like, oh, because my butt's so big, you know? And it was just like, oh, I can just go somewhere. And also the tailor is not judgmental. They are like, yeah, these jeans are silly. They don't fit you right, you know? And then they just fix it. Like,
by the way, take it from somebody who has taken a pair of pants to the tailor to get the waist taken in, then gained some weight, and took them back to the tailor to get them let out. That's what tailors do. They're beautiful. The other thing, and I don't want to like, I know we've been going for a long time, but I feel like this might blow people's minds, is that like sized clothing, like and we all know that there's no standard, but beyond that, it's a like relatively new development in the history of like humans wearing clothes. And it's only because of like basically capitalism and the Industrial Revolution and the idea that like instead of like going to the local clothes like seamstress or suit maker,
you used to get
they'd
everything
measure you,
made for you,
made for your body. There was no size. There was Sophie's size, and there was, you know, Caden's size, and there was
just have our little notebook of our sizes, and that's it.
And then maybe you'd be like, "Oh, I had a baby, or I think I gained weight, or what?" Or they just measure you again because why risk it? And then they'd make you clothes, and you'd have to wait, and you'd be patient, and then you'd value your clothes because it took a long time and it was expensive. But the idea of size clothes is so bananas because like
it actually makes no sense.
You can line up. I'm like usually a size 6. I have like a 28-inch waist. You could line up like 10 people with my size, and our bodies would look so different.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then clothes don't fit. So then they just put polyester spandex stretch garbage in them, and then they don't last and they don't look as good, and they're made of fossil fuels. And our clothes, it's not you. It wasn't always like this. And sizes have nothing to do with like trying to like get clothes to look the best on people. It's because it was like, well, we could make a lot more and make a lot more money.
Well, exactly. Capitalism always just wants you to buy more. So then it's like, buy these jeans, the jeans that always fit, buy this, you know, slimming fabric, whatever undergarment thing, so that you always look great in your thing that wasn't designed for your body. So
oh, it wasn't designed for your body. Try this one. Oh, that wasn't designed for your body. Try this one. Try this one. Try this one.
Well, I want to kind of sum up with your point that like a lot of people walk around in clothing, with the clothing basically being the purpose of it is to be, you know, to make them appear thin or to be flattering in a way that is extremely narrow. And so it's almost like it's not an expression of themselves. It's just a constant check. Like, do I quote unquote look good for what society tells me I have to look like, which is so sad because our, you know, being able to dress yourself is just such a wonderful place to have expression and, you know, learn about yourself and push your own boundaries. And it is pretty low stakes. Like you said, you can just go to the grocery store in your sequins or whatever and be like, maybe I can wear sequins all the time. And I think similarly with my work, so many people go around with their bodies just always trying to control their body in whatever way ever since they went through puberty. And they miss the fact that their body can be used in so many wonderful ways and feel really good. And that it isn't always just this ongoing dirge to try to control what is completely uncontrollable.
Totally.
And if we married these things together, we would feel less sad to grow out of some clothing or to move back into clothing or be like, I don't like this anymore. I do like this, because we are always changing. And so, you know,
and it's not tied to, it's not moral.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yes. I feel like we could probably go for like 3 more hours. So you're the poor listeners.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Clearly, we're going to have you back. I will, not me and my podcast team.
your 10 person bench.
Me and my sleeping chihuahua will have you back. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was great.